At the family dinner, my mother-in-law raised her glass and said, "Proud of everyone, except my useless daughter-in-law." Laughter erupted. I stood, dropped a sealed envelope on the table and said, "Happy Mother's Day." Then I walked out, took back the luxury gift, and minutes later she screamed after reading the truth. The Mercedes dealership smelled like leather and expensive dreams. I stood there for 3 hours not because I couldn't decide on the color, pearl white her favorite, but because my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The salesman kept asking if I was sure, his eyebrows raised at the price tag that would drain half my savings account. I nodded each time, signing papers with determination that felt more like desperation. "It's for my mother-in-law," I explained, watching his expression shift from confusion to something resembling pity. He probably thought I was crazy. Maybe I was. But crazy felt better than invisible. Before we continue, I want to thank you for joining me in sharing these stories of finding your voice. If you believe everyone deserves respect in their relationships, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach more people who need to hear this. Now let's see how this unfolds. The past 3 years had been a masterclass in rejection disguised as politeness. Every family gathering, every holiday, every celebration, I was the outsider looking in through glass that never seemed to break. She had a way of making me feel like a guest who'd overstayed their welcome in my own marriage. Her son, my husband, would always find excuses: "She's just traditional," or "Give her time," or my personal favorite, "You're being too sensitive." Too sensitive. Those words echoed in my head as I ran my fingers along the pristine hood of the car. This wasn't sensitivity. This was strategy. If money talks, then maybe a $75,000 conversation would finally make her hear me. I'd researched everything. Her dream car since she was 25, the exact model she'd pointed out in magazines, the features she'd mentioned wanting. Every detail had been catalogued in my mind like evidence in a case I was determined to win. The heated seats for her arthritis, the premium sound system for her classical music obsession, even the specific shade of interior that matched her living room decor. Standing in my bedroom that morning, I'd tried on 4 different outfits. The blue dress, too casual. The black suit, too formal, like I was attending a funeral instead of giving life to a relationship. The cream-colored ensemble, perfect. Sophisticated but approachable, expensive but not flashy. I'd even practiced my smile in the mirror, the kind that said, "I belong here," instead of, "Please accept me." My reflection stared back at me with eyes that held too much hope. I applied lipstick with surgical precision, each stroke a small act of armor. The pearl earrings, a wedding gift from my own mother, caught the light as I turned my head. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," she'd said on my wedding day. "Just remember, you can't change people who don't want to be changed." I should have listened. The drive to their house was a 20-minute therapy session with myself. Traffic lights became opportunities to rehearse my speech. "I saw this and thought of you immediately." Too eager. "I hope you love it as much as I enjoyed picking it out." Too desperate. "Happy Mother's Day, Mom." The word mom stuck in my throat like a foreign language I'd never quite mastered. Her neighborhood always made me feel like an imposter. Manicured lawns that probably cost more to maintain than my monthly salary, driveways that housed cars worth more than small houses, and that particular silence that money buys. No crying babies, no barking dogs, no life that wasn't perfectly orchestrated. I parked 3 houses down, needing a moment to collect myself. The gift wasn't just in the car. It was in the hope I'd wrapped around it like ribbon. This was my white flag, my peace offering, my final attempt at building a bridge across the chasm she'd dug between us. The keys felt heavier than they should have in my palm. Cool metal against warm skin, each ridge and curve representing hours of planning, weeks of saving, months of dreaming about this moment. I'd imagined her face lighting up, her arms opening, her voice saying something, anything, that sounded like acceptance. My phone buzzed. A text from my sister. "Are you sure about this? That's a lot of money for someone who treats you like garbage." I turned the phone face down. She didn't understand. Nobody did. This wasn't about the money. It was about possibility. The possibility that love could be bought, that respect could be earned, that maybe, just maybe, I could purchase my way into a family that felt more like an exclusive club with membership I couldn't afford. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was trying to buy love from someone who already had everything, while my own mother worked double shifts just to keep her apartment. But desperation makes hypocrites of us all. I checked my appearance one final time in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back at me was polished, poised, and completely terrified. I whispered a prayer to whoever might be listening. Please let this work. Please let her see me. Please let this be enough. The walk to their front door felt like walking the plank. Each step was measured, deliberate, carrying the weight of 3 years' worth of slights, dismissals, and carefully crafted cruelty. The gift box containing the keys felt both substantial and insignificant in my hands. Substantial because of what it represented, insignificant because deep down, I already knew the truth I wasn't ready to face. Some people can't be bought. Some bridges can't be built. Some wars can't be won with kindness. But I wasn't ready to surrender. Not yet. The front door opened before I could ring the bell. She stood there in her signature emerald dress, the one that made her eyes look like cut glass, her smile already in place for the audience gathering behind her. "Darling," she exclaimed, loud enough for everyone to hear, her arms spreading wide in a performance of maternal warmth. But when she leaned in for the obligatory air kiss, her whisper was ice against my ear. "You're 20 minutes late." I wasn't. I was exactly on time. But punctuality, like everything else about me, would never be enough. The living room buzzed with the kind of energy that expensive wine and carefully curated guest lists create. Her book club friends, the country club ladies, my husband's cousins, all the people whose approval she collected like trophies. I recognized the choreography immediately. I was the opening act, the warm-up before the real show began. "Everyone, you remember my daughter-in-law," she announced, her hand on my shoulder feeling more like a leash than affection. The polite nods and forced smiles rippled through the room like dominoes falling. Mrs. Henderson from next door gave me that look. The one that said she remembered last Christmas when I'd accidentally used the wrong fork for the salad course. I moved toward the kitchen, muscle memory guiding me to the one place where I might find refuge. Sarah, her sister, was arranging appetizers on crystal plates that probably cost more than my car payment. "Can I help?" I asked, genuinely wanting to contribute, to find some corner of usefulness in this perfectly orchestrated evening. Sarah glanced toward the living room, then back at me. "Oh, that's sweet, honey, but I think Margaret has everything under control." Her voice carried that particular brand of kindness that felt like rejection wrapped in silk. "Why don't you go mingle? I'm sure everyone would love to catch up with you." Catch up about what? My non-existent career? My failure to produce grandchildren? The way I'd somehow disappointed their golden boy despite 3 years of trying to become someone worthy of their family name? I retreated to the corner near the piano, nursing a glass of wine that tasted like expensive regret. From there I could watch the performance unfold. She moved through the crowd like a conductor leading an orchestra, every gesture deliberate, every laugh perfectly timed. When she spoke to Dr. Martinez about his latest golf game, her eyes sparkled with genuine interest. When she complimented Mrs. Chen's new haircut, her voice carried authentic warmth. But when her gaze found me across the room, the temperature dropped 10 degrees. My husband appeared at her elbow, transformed into the version of himself that only existed in her presence. Gone was the man who watched Netflix with me in pajamas, replaced by this eager-to-please stranger who laughed too hard at her jokes and hung on her every word like gospel. "Mom, did you see the flowers Emma brought?" he said, gesturing toward the modest bouquet I'd placed on the side table. She glanced at them dismissively. "How thoughtful. Though I do prefer roses. White ones. But I suppose not everyone knows that." I knew. I'd asked him specifically about her favorite flowers last week. He'd shrugged and said she liked whatever. Another small betrayal in a marriage built on his inability to choose sides. The evening progressed like a slow-motion disaster. Every attempt at conversation became a landmine. When I mentioned my new yoga classes, she steered the discussion toward her Pilates instructor who really understands proper form. When I complimented the dinner, she launched into a detailed explanation of how difficult it was to find quality ingredients, as if I'd somehow implied she'd shopped at a discount grocery store. Her friends began to pick up on the dynamic, their eyes darting between us like spectators at a tennis match. I could feel their pity, thick and uncomfortable, settling over the room like humidity. Some looked away when she made her little digs. Others smiled nervously, unsure whether to laugh or intervene. The worst part wasn't her cruelty, it was how normal it felt. 3 years had trained me to expect this treatment, to brace for impact every time we shared the same space. I'd become fluent in the language of subtle humiliation, conversational in the art of being made invisible while standing in plain sight. Dinner was served with military precision. I found myself seated between Uncle Robert, who spent 40 minutes explaining cryptocurrency, and Cousin Jennifer, who kept checking her phone and apologizing for being so busy with work. Real work, her tone implied. Not whatever it was I did to fill my days. The conversation flowed around me like water around a stone. I smiled at appropriate moments, nodded when expected, laughed when cued. But inside I was cataloging every slight, every dismissal, every moment when my husband chose his mother's comfort over my dignity. Dessert arrived, an elaborate chocolate creation that probably took hours to prepare. She served everyone personally, making little comments about their preferences, their dietary restrictions, their lives that mattered enough to remember. When she reached me, she placed the plate down without ceremony. No comment, no eye contact, no acknowledgement that I was anything more than furniture requiring feeding. That's when she stood, crystal glass in hand, commanding the room's attention with the effortless authority of someone who'd never doubted her place in the world. The conversation died, faces turned toward her expectantly, and I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Her smile was radiant, practiced, perfect. I just want to take a moment to say how grateful I am for all of you. My wonderful friends, my amazing family. Her eyes swept the room, touching each face with warmth and affection, until they reached me. I'm so proud of everyone here tonight. Everyone except my useless daughter-in-law. The words hit the room like a slap. For a heartbeat there was silence. Then someone, I think it was Uncle Robert, let out a nervous chuckle. Then another. Then the room erupted in laughter, the kind that feeds on discomfort and grows stronger with each voice that joins it. I sat there, fork halfway to my mouth, watching my husband's face crumple with embarrassment. Not for me. For himself. For being associated with someone who'd just been publicly executed at his mother's dinner table. Something inside me went very still. Very quiet. Very done. The laughter was still echoing when I felt my legs push against the chair. My body moved before my mind could catch up, rising with a deliberate slowness that seemed to stretch time itself. The room's energy shifted. Conversations faltered mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway to mouths. And suddenly every eye was tracking my movement like a predator sensing prey. My purse sat beside my chair, innocent and unassuming. Inside, nestled between my lipstick and car keys, was the white envelope I'd sealed 3 months ago. The envelope I'd hoped I'd never need to use. The envelope that contained words I'd written in a moment of clarity so sharp it had cut through years of self-doubt. I'd forgotten about it until tonight. Until that moment when her cruelty finally exceeded my capacity for forgiveness. Now it felt like destiny, like every humiliation had been leading to this exact moment when I would finally speak a language she understood. My hand found the envelope without fumbling. Muscle memory guided me as I lifted it from the depths of my bag, its weight somehow both insignificant and monumental. The paper was crisp, expensive, the kind she'd approve of if she weren't about to become its victim. The walk to her end of the table felt like crossing a battlefield. Each step echoed in the sudden silence, my heels clicking against hardwood with military precision. The distance couldn't have been more than 8 feet, but it felt like crossing continents. I could feel the weight of every stare, the collective held breath of people who'd never seen anyone stand up to the queen of their little social kingdom. She was still smiling when I reached her, that victorious expression frozen on her face like a mask that hadn't yet realized the play had changed. Her wine glass caught the chandelier light, creating tiny rainbows that danced across the white tablecloth. It was beautiful, elegant, perfect. Everything she demanded her world to be. I placed the envelope directly in front of that glass, the white paper stark against the burgundy liquid. My fingers didn't shake. My voice didn't waver. 3 years of swallowed words had crystallized into this moment of absolute calm. "Happy Mother's Day," I said, and the words came out soft, gentle, almost tender. They carried the weight of every Mother's Day gift I'd agonized over, every card I'd signed with hope, every attempt at connection she'd rejected. But now they meant something different. Now they were a eulogy for the relationship that had never existed. The envelope sat there like a small white tombstone, marking the death of my attempts to belong in her world. I turned away from her confused expression, from the table of frozen faces, from the life I'd tried so desperately to fit into. The dining room that had felt like a courtroom moments before now felt like a museum, beautiful, untouchable, and ultimately meaningless. The front door opened easily under my hand. Outside, the spring air hit my face like freedom itself, cool and clean after the suffocating atmosphere of enforced politeness. My car, the Mercedes that should have been her gift, waited in the driveway like a getaway vehicle. The keys were already in my palm, warm from my grip and ready for their true purpose. Not as a peace offering but as my escape route. I'd bought the car thinking it would build a bridge between us. Instead, it became the vehicle that carried me away from her forever. The leather seat embraced me like an old friend. The engine purred to life with expensive precision, and for the first time all evening something felt right. The dashboard glowed softly in the darkness, all the features I'd chosen specifically for her now serving me instead. I adjusted the rearview mirror and caught sight of the house, all lit up and perfect, like a movie set designed to showcase an ideal life that existed only on the surface. Through the dining room window I could see shadows moving frantically. The dinner party that had been orchestrated to humiliate me was now in chaos. My phone buzzed in my purse. Then again. And again. The panic was beginning. I put the car in reverse, the motion smooth and satisfying. 3 years of walking on eggshells, 3 years of measuring my words, 3 years of shrinking myself to fit into spaces that were never meant for me. All of it was ending with the simple act of backing out of a driveway. That's when I heard it. The scream cut through the evening air like a siren, sharp and desperate and completely unlike the controlled voice she'd used to destroy me moments before. It was raw, unfiltered, the sound of someone whose perfectly constructed world had just cracked down the middle. I paused, my foot hovering over the brake, and smiled. Not the polite, practiced smile I'd worn for 3 years, but something real and satisfied and entirely my own. She'd opened the envelope. Inside, written in my careful handwriting on paper that matched her own expensive stationery, were the words I'd been saving for exactly this moment. I know about the trust fund. I know about the inheritance conditions. I know about the prenup you made him sign. And I know you never expected the useless daughter-in-law to have copies of everything. My lawyer will be in touch Monday morning. Enjoy your Mother's Day. The screaming continued as I shifted into drive, but it was growing fainter now, swallowed by distance and the satisfying hum of an engine that had never sounded so sweet. For 3 years she'd held all the cards. Tonight I'd finally played mine. The road ahead stretched empty and full of possibility, and I drove toward it without looking back. The first red light gave me 30 seconds of stillness before the storm truly began. My phone, tucked safely in my purse, had started its digital seizure, vibrating so frantically it sounded like an angry wasp trapped in fabric. I pulled into a gas station parking lot, engines still running, and watched the screen light up with incoming calls. Michael. Unknown number. Michael again. Her name, Margaret, flashing like a warning signal. Then numbers I didn't recognize, probably borrowed phones when I stopped answering the familiar ones. The desperation was almost palpable through the glass screen. I held the phone for a moment, thumb hovering over the power button. 3 years of jumping every time it rang, 3 years of checking messages with anxiety knotting my stomach, 3 years of being available for their convenience. The power button clicked with finality and the screen went black. Into the glove compartment it went, nestled between insurance papers and the car manual she'd never read. Silence had never felt so luxurious. Back at the house I could only imagine the chaos unfolding. Margaret, who prided herself on controlling every narrative, every perception, every carefully curated detail of her social standing, would be in full damage control mode. But how do you control damage when you don't even understand what's been damaged? The envelope had been deliberately vague, designed to make her paranoia do most of the work. She'd know I had something on her, something significant enough to make me walk away from a marriage and a family with complete confidence. But not knowing exactly what would eat at her more than any specific threat. I drove aimlessly for 20 minutes, letting muscle memory guide me through familiar streets while my mind processed what I'd just done. The city looked different somehow, like I was seeing it through new eyes. The streetlights seemed brighter, the late evening traffic less oppressive. Even the radio sounded better, playing songs I'd forgotten I loved. The Marriott downtown had availability. I'd stayed there once for a work conference, back when I had work that mattered, before I'd gradually let my career die in service of being the perfect wife to an imperfect man. The lobby smelled like expensive candles and new beginnings. Just for tonight? The clerk asked, fingers poised over her keyboard. I'm not sure yet, I replied, and realized it was the first honest answer I'd given anyone in months. Room 847 became my sanctuary. I dropped my hastily packed tote bag on the king-sized bed and felt something inside my chest unfurl for the first time in years. No dinner to plan around his schedule. No social events to navigate around her moods. No conversations to monitor for hidden landmines. Just silence. Beautiful golden silence. I ordered room service. Something decadent and completely impractical for dinner. Chocolate-covered strawberries and expensive wine. The kind of meal that would have triggered one of Margaret's lectures about proper nutrition and setting a good example. Tonight it felt like rebellion on a plate. My laptop opened to 17 new emails, but only one caught my attention. Jessica, Michael's cousin from Portland, the one who'd always been too young for Margaret's inner circle but old enough to see through the family politics. Holy shit, Emma. What was in that envelope? Everyone's losing their minds. Margaret locked herself in the study and Michael's pacing the living room like a caged animal. Also, whatever you did, bravo. Someone needed to knock her off that pedestal years ago. I smiled, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Jessica had always been the family truth teller, the one who said what everyone else only whispered behind closed doors. Her approval meant more than she probably realized. Let's just say I finally learned to speak her language, I typed back. More messages trickled in throughout the evening. Michael's brother from Chicago. Not sure what happened, but mom's calling everyone demanding they cut ties with you. Most people are asking what took you so long. My former sister-in-law, divorced from the family 3 years ago. Welcome to the club, honey. Population. Everyone who's smart enough to run. But the most surprising message came from Dr. Martinez, Margaret's neighbor and longtime family friend. My wife and I witnessed what happened tonight. We wanted you to know that many of us have been waiting for someone to stand up to her behavior. It's been uncomfortable to watch for years. Whatever gave you the courage, we're glad you found it. That one made me pause. How many people had been silent witnesses to my humiliation? How many had wanted to speak up but lacked the courage? How many dinner parties, family gatherings, and social events had been tainted by her cruelty while everyone looked the other way? The wine made me philosophical, or maybe it was the freedom. I found myself scrolling through old photos on my laptop. Pictures from before Michael, before marriage, before I'd started shrinking myself to fit into spaces that were never meant for me. There she was. The woman who'd moved across the country for a job promotion, who'd negotiated her first salary increase, who'd backpacked through Europe alone and loved every uncertain moment. When had I stopped being her? Around midnight, Jessica sent another message. Update. Margaret's made 5 phone calls trying to find out what you think you know. She's demanding everyone choose sides. Most people are choosing awkward silence. Michael looks like he's been hit by a truck. What did you do? I closed the laptop without responding. Some victories were meant to be savored in silence. Outside my hotel room window, the city sparkled with possibility. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and difficult conversations and the messy work of untangling a life I'd spent 3 years building around other people's expectations. But tonight was mine. I raised my wine glass to my reflection in the window, to the woman who'd finally stopped apologizing for taking up space in her own life. Morning came with room service coffee and sunlight that didn't judge. I'd slept better than I had in months, wrapped in hotel sheets that smelled like lavender instead of the tension that had permeated our bedroom at home. My phone, retrieved from its glove compartment exile, showed 43 missed calls and 17 voicemails. I selected one at random. Michael's voice, recorded at 2:47 a.m. Emma, I don't understand what's happening. She's falling apart. She won't tell me what was in that envelope, just keeps saying you've destroyed everything. What did you do? What's wrong with you? His voice cracked on the last word, exhaustion bleeding through the speaker. Everyone's asking questions I can't answer because I don't even know what game we're playing anymore. The message continued with background noise. Muffled voices, what sounded like crying, the chaos of a family in free fall. Just call me back, okay? We can fix this. We always fix things. That's what we do. I deleted it without listening to the rest. The next voicemail was Margaret herself, her voice tight with the kind of control that comes from years of practice managing crises. Emma, darling, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'd like to invite you to lunch this week. Just the two of us. We can discuss whatever concerns you might have like civilized adults. Even in panic, she couldn't resist the subtle digs. Civilized adults implied I'd been something else. Concerns suggested my reaction was an overreaction. Misunderstanding painted last night as a simple communication error rather than 3 years of systematic emotional warfare. I deleted that one too. But it was the text from Sarah, Michael's younger cousin, that stopped me cold. I wish I had your courage. I've been watching her tear people down for 20 years and I've never seen anyone just walk away like that. You looked so calm. How did you get so brave? I stared at that message for 10 minutes, coffee growing cold in my hands. Sarah had always seemed so confident at family gatherings, so perfectly at ease in Margaret's world. The idea that she'd been suffering in silence, that my moment of rebellion had given her something to hope for, felt heavier than any victory I'd claimed for myself. My phone rang. Unknown number. Mrs. Richardson? This is James Whitfield from Whitfield and Associates. I represent Margaret Richardson in family matters. His voice carried the smooth authority of expensive legal training. She's asked me to reach out regarding the situation last evening. She's quite eager to resolve any misunderstandings and would appreciate the opportunity to speak with you directly. I appreciate the call, Mr. Whitfield, but I'll be retaining my own counsel. Any further communication should go through them. Of course, that's entirely your right. However, I should mention that Mrs. Richardson is prepared to be quite generous in resolving this matter quickly and quietly. The offer hung in the air like bait. Quick and quiet. The way Margaret preferred to handle threats to her carefully constructed image. Money in exchange for silence, dignity purchased with dollars, my pain converted into a transaction she could control. As I said, Mr. Whitfield, please direct all communication to my attorney. Have a lovely day. I hung up and immediately called Rebecca Chin, the divorce lawyer my sister had recommended years ago when she'd left her own toxic marriage. I need representation, I said without preamble when she answered. And I need it to be someone who isn't impressed by country club politics or family money. How soon can you be here? Rebecca asked, and I could hear her already reaching for a legal pad. The afternoon belonged to Sophie, my college roommate turned successful therapist, the friend who'd watched my personality slowly drain away over 3 years of marriage. Her apartment smelled like vanilla candles and the kind of acceptance I'd forgotten existed. You look different, she said, settling into the chair across from me with 2 steaming mugs of chamomile tea. Your shoulders aren't up around your ears anymore. We talked about everything except Margaret and Michael and the envelope that had changed everything. Sophie told me about her disastrous online date with a man who'd brought his mother to dinner. I shared stories from my new job at the marketing firm, the one I'd started 6 months ago when I'd finally stopped trying to be the perfect housewife to a man who'd never noticed the effort. For 2 hours I was just Emma again. Not the disappointing daughter-in-law, not the wife who couldn't measure up, not the woman who'd spent 3 years apologizing for existing in spaces where she wasn't wanted. Just me, laughing until my stomach hurt at Sophie's impression of her mother's latest attempt at matchmaking. You know what I realized today? Sophie said as I was getting ready to leave. I haven't seen you laugh like that since before your wedding. I was starting to think I'd imagined the Emma I went to college with. That night I drove to my own apartment, the one I'd kept despite Michael's protests about unnecessary expenses. He'd never understood why I needed my own space, somewhere that belonged entirely to me. Tonight, as I turned the key in the lock and stepped into rooms that smelled like my candles and held my books and displayed my photographs, I understood it perfectly. This was what home felt like. I made tea in my own kitchen, using the mismatched mugs I'd collected from various coffee shops instead of the matching china set Margaret had given us for our first anniversary. I curled up on my second-hand couch with the throw blanket my grandmother had crocheted, surrounded by the silence that comes from being exactly where you belong. My phone buzzed with another message from Michael. I drove by your apartment. I saw the lights. I know you're there. Please just talk to me. I looked out my window. His car sat in the parking lot like a question mark, headlights cutting through the darkness. Part of me wanted to go down there to explain and comfort and smooth things over the way I always had. The old Emma would have already been putting on shoes, already crafting apologies for causing such a scene. Instead, I closed the blinds and turned up the music. For the first time in 3 years, I was exactly where I wanted to be, doing exactly what I wanted to do with no one to please but myself. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of possibility. 3 weeks after the envelope, Margaret's carefully constructed social empire began showing its first real cracks. The story had traveled through their circle with the speed that only true scandal achieves. Whispered over tennis matches, discussed during book club meetings, analyzed over expensive lunches at the country club. The woman who'd built her reputation on controlling narratives suddenly found herself the subject of one she couldn't manage. I heard about it through Jessica, who'd become my unofficial intelligence network within the family. "She's telling everyone you had some kind of breakdown," Jessica reported during one of our weekly coffee meetings. "Says you've been unstable for months, that Michael's been covering for you out of kindness." But the story wasn't sticking. Too many people had witnessed that dinner, had seen my composure against her cruelty. The narrative of the unstable daughter-in-law crumbled when measured against the memory of my calm exit and her subsequent hysteria. Rebecca Chen's office became my sanctuary during those weeks. She was everything Margaret wasn't: direct without being cruel, powerful without needing to diminish others. When I explained what I wanted from the divorce, she didn't flinch. "Emotional neglect and complicit abuse," I said, the words coming easier than I'd expected. 3 years of systematic isolation and psychological manipulation, enabled by a husband who chose his mother's comfort over his wife's dignity. Rebecca blinked once, then nodded with the recognition of someone who'd seen this story before. "Do you have documentation?" I smiled, thinking of the envelope's contents. Not just the financial documents that had terrorized Margaret, but the careful record I'd been keeping for months. Screenshots of family group chats where I was excluded from plans. Voice recordings of conversations where Michael promised to handle his mother but never did. Email threads about family events where my dietary restrictions were ignored despite multiple reminders. "I have everything," I said. The divorce proceedings moved with surprising efficiency. Michael's attempts at reconciliation grew increasingly desperate and frankly pathetic. He showed up at my apartment twice more, leaving flowers that wilted untouched on my doorstep. He sent long rambling texts that swung between anger and pleading, each one confirming my decision more firmly than the last. The Mercedes sold within a week. The buyer was a young entrepreneur who'd just landed her first major contract. She reminded me of myself before I'd learned to shrink. When she handed me the check, I felt something shift inside my chest, like a lock finally clicking open. The money became the seed for something I'd dreamed about since college but had buried under years of being the supportive wife. A consulting firm specializing in helping small businesses develop authentic brand voices. The kind of work that energized me, that made me forget to check the clock, that felt like coming home to myself. I rented a small office space in the Arts District, somewhere Margaret would never venture. The walls were exposed brick, the coffee was perfect, and my nearest neighbors were a ceramic studio and a vintage bookshop. Every morning, I walked into that space and remembered who I'd been before I'd started editing myself to fit someone else's expectations. The clients came slowly at first, then in a steady stream as words spread. Each project was a small rebellion against everything Margaret had taught me about my own limitations. I was good at this work, better than good. I was exceptional in ways that had nothing to do with anyone else's approval. 6 months after the envelope, I stood in the courthouse hallway waiting for my name to be called. The divorce papers were signed, the settlement finalized. Rebecca had warned me that Michael might try one last dramatic gesture, but the hallway remained empty except for other people waiting for their own legal watersheds. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, but I recognized the tone immediately. "We could have fixed this." No signature, no identification, but it carried the weight of every conversation we'd never had, every compromise I'd made that he'd never noticed, every moment when he could have chosen me and hadn't. The message sat there like a final test, waiting to see if I'd engage, if I'd explain, if I'd give him one last chance to make me responsible for his regrets. I deleted it without responding. "Emma Richardson?" The clerk's voice cut through my thoughts. I followed her into the courtroom where a judge I'd never seen before would officially dissolve a marriage that had been dying long before I'd found the courage to bury it. The proceedings took 12 minutes. 12 minutes to undo 3 years of trying to become someone I was never meant to be. When the judge pronounced us legally divorced, I felt lighter than I had since my wedding day, maybe lighter than I'd ever felt. Outside the courthouse, late afternoon sun painted everything golden. I stood on the steps for a moment, breathing in air that tasted like freedom. My phone rang, Sophie calling to celebrate. Rebecca walked past and squeezed my shoulder, her expression proud in a way that reminded me what healthy support looked like. I thought about the woman who'd walked into that Mother's Day dinner 6 months ago, clutching hope and car keys like talismans against rejection. She'd been so desperate to belong somewhere that she'd forgotten she already belonged to herself. The woman walking down these courthouse steps was different. Not because she'd won some battle, but because she'd finally stopped fighting a war that was never hers to begin with. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Sarah's contact. Coffee next week? I typed. I want to hear about your plans to start that photography business. Some victories aren't about defeating others. Sometimes they're about refusing to let others defeat you. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is simply walk away and build something beautiful from the pieces they couldn't break. If this story of ultimate revenge had you holding your breath, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Emma calmly placed that mysterious envelope and walked away with the car. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more empowering stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.